Unite is a union formed from 2007, a merger of the former ATGWU and the former Amicus, bringing us to over 70,000 members in Ireland. We organise Northern Ireland and here in the Republic, and obviously across England, Scotland and Wales as a union that's building its strength across Britain and in Ireland. One or two examples of the strength of what we're trying to build is in construction. And in construction, Northern Ireland and here in the Republic, we've really organised well on the building sites, giving a strength to workers on those sites, that there's some kind of decent treatment in terms of wages and conditions. And we've recently had a success in a leverage campaign in regard to blacklisting.
Can I just take that silence gap to remind people to put their phones on silent? I know you're all right, but can people do that now, maybe?
No problem, no problem.
Yeah.
So obviously blacklisting being a big feature of how bosses treat workers in construction. Everybody working on a particular site, you depend on being taken on then when you move to a different site. You're sort of working your way out of a job from the start of the building site. So we've had good success in terms of defending workers against the blacklisting. And in the middle of all what's happening in terms of the crisis and austerity and all that, we had a recent meeting in the Red Cow with 350, not a sort of around 350 or a mock 350, 350 construction workers at that meeting in the Red Cow. Not easily put together these days, meetings with attendance of 350. And the great thing about it was all of the young people that were at that meeting, all young construction workers, seen the need to be organised, seen through certain sellout unions that had left them down along the way, and looking for an organisation that gave them the strength and the power to fight back. Talking to Tom Hogan there earlier, there was talk about the housing situation in Northern Ireland at an earlier meeting with Goretti Horgan. And again, we're having big success in organising building workers in Northern Ireland. The housing executive, which would be there for a long number of years, coming from those early days of trying to get some kind of balance between Catholics getting houses and all the horrors of sectarianism. But real success in organising construction workers in Northern Ireland. And it's not that there's some magic solution to this or some complicated thing that has to be done. It's about giving workers the strength in their workplace to organise collectively and defend themselves against bosses and against, where appropriate, against government as employers in local authorities. So that's the sort of union that we're trying to build. The title of the meeting, Reclaiming Our Unions, you know, not an easy challenge in terms of what's happening today, and in some ways it can seem overwhelming. But I think what we need to see is that the enemy is pessimism, and pessimism leading to hopelessness. That's exactly what they want us to believe. The sellout merchants that are within certain unions, that have done deals behind workers' backs, that have sold out when workers take decisions to defend themselves, and the government, a coalition government, which is absolutely vicious in terms of implementing an austerity policy. There's no cuddly Enda Kenny and Eamon Gilmore. It's a vicious agenda of austerity in the coalition government. It's understandable because we have to be honest in terms of assessing and analysing exactly where we're at. There's no point in kidding ourselves. The lack of leadership that's come from certain unions is absolutely putting workers into that feeling and mindset that they can't fight back. And that's, of course, what's intended by certain leadership. The association with partnership, that for years put trade union leaders into the sort of mindset they were sitting at the top table, they were practically in government, they knew what was best for everybody, and they were going to be part of running the country. That association with partnership not only sold out in terms of certain deals, but sucked the lifeblood out of workers' organisations. That was the real tragedy of partnership. All of that shop steward organisation, fighting back in your workplace, into the annual pay round, defending yourself against attacks on employers, and where the pendulum had swung in your favour, full order books, taking on extra workers, all that, you had the ability to squeeze out of that employer what was needed in terms of pay and conditions. That's the lifeblood that was sucked out during those years of partnership. But at the same time, this year showed a fantastic demonstration of preparedness to fight back by public sector workers. I won't go through the whole history, but you saw what happened under Croke Park 1. You saw the attempt in Croke Park 2 to move towards further cuts and further job losses right across the public sector, with recommendations coming from unions like SIP2 and Impact, and also the INTO teachers organisation, all going in favour of Croke Park 2. We were part of a 4-union alliance, the INMO, the CPSU, the IMO and Unite, and going to meetings around the country. A massive rejection of Croke Park 2 against all the odds, because you were going to end up having to fight back through strikes once you rejected Croke Park 2 and the momentum being maintained to defend living standards within the public sector. Union leaders who were saying at the time during the ballot that you were going to, if you were voting against this, you were voting for a strike. That wasn't to encourage a strike. It was to frighten people and think that, well, I vote against this, I'll have to go on strike. It was done to try and frighten people. Be in no doubt that there was some encouragement given to government to move in the direction of that emergency legislation. Have the weapon to impose this on workers if they're going to reject it. And if you saw Howlin the night that the result of this rejection was announced, he didn't look like a government minister that was up for attacking and implementing workers following that rejection. He looked like the proverbial rabbit caught in the headlights. So had the momentum been maintained, the vote being respected, workers being told, you've rejected this, the leadership being prepared to fight back with that rejection on board, that's not what happened. The language of sectoral negotiations, that was the language of sellout, and that's what moved against workers. And workers, when they see the leadership not prepared to fight, when they see the leadership moving away from the massive rejection, that's the sort of pessimism that gets into members' heads. We're a bit tight for time, so I just want to make the point that, first of all, Unite wants to create the space for political organisation and left organisation and socialist politics within the union. We've now disaffiliated from the Irish Labour Party. That's opening up an opportunity. It's probably not good enough to know what you don't want. So disaffiliating from the Labour Party is one thing. What do we want? How do we engage with real socialists, and how do we move the union towards supporting people that will support us in our hour of fight back and the need to do that? So we're trying to win the argument that we're moving in that direction with the politics, but also how can we, for example, organise for a People's Assembly? Moving, first of all, towards what we need to do here. Getting as much support within trade unions as is possible, across trade unions, good activists, because when you describe the way some of the leaders behave, you need to also say that there's good, excellent, fighting back, decent, fighting back trade unionists in all the unions. That's the good news. How do we link up those people that are in all the unions prepared to fight back? Trying to move towards doing what we can do on that People's Assembly. A proposal at that Assembly, for example, put down by our union, will be a charter for workers' rights. Workers' rights being trampled on. How do we get decent treatment? People, the working poor on the minimum wage. How do we get a living wage? Every union leader that's made speeches on the 1913 centenary, it's 100 years later and we still haven't got, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to get the sort of recognition that our workers' organisations need in this country? So I need to wind up by just saying that if that's our effort over the next few weeks, get those People's Assembly. We have one organised in Belfast for the beginning of December. If we can get people on board to do the same here, within unions, within other organisations, any organisation that's fighting back can affiliate to the People's Assembly. So it's one example of, I think, where we can reclaim unions. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Alan Laws from SIP2 Grassroots. So.
How you doing? My name is Alan Laws. I've been a SIP2 member for 40 years. And I joined SIP2 Grassroots about a year or two ago because I was looking at what our own union in SIP2 were doing. And in the worst economic crisis that any of us in this room have ever experienced in this country, our own trade union movement, as far as I'm concerned, abandoned us. And you have to look at, we all want, I'd be like Jimmy, you want to reclaim the union, I want to kind of get back at fight the spirit within a union to stand up for workers. So you have to reflect on what went wrong. And I'm going back to 87 and when I first became an activist in the trade union movement. That was during another economic crisis. And that was when partnership, as Jimmy's mentioned, has just started. And it was just started and it seemed like a good thing because we've always argued that we need trade unionists in positions of power to influence, to be on the board of management of companies, to be on the boards of management of the central bank, to be on the boards of management of FOSS. We would think to ourselves that having people in them positions would be great for trade unionists and workers. But unfortunately what started out as a good project in partnership went astray. If you look at the problems of the country that we have in the country, what did David Begg do for us, sitting on the board of management of the central bank? Did he resign when the central bank didn't seem to be doing their job? Did he resign in disgust that there was no regulation of what the likes of Anglo-Irish Bank was doing? We heard nothing. So he didn't influence the central bank's board of management at all. He was an absolute and utter failure. Let's be honest about it. That's the truth. So then you look at the other board of management where we were, but FOSS, a big group that looks after unemployed people. And then we have a person on that, from SIP2 again, well, from SIP2 this time, Des Geraghty. And we look at and we examine what he did during his period of time on the board of management of FOSS. What he seems to have done, he seems to have been in the O2 at a lot of concerts. He seems to have been at a lot of rugby matches, a lot of football matches, usually in the premium boxes, with his pals and mates. Maybe Jack O'Connor was with him, I don't know. I know I wasn't there. But that's what the extent of Des Geraghty's work in the partnership process was. It was nothing. They did absolutely nothing for us. What we expected them to do, what we would have liked to do is Mr. Begg resign from the central bank, complain about the lack of regulation. For Mr. Geraghty resign from FOSS and say that the waste of millions and millions of pounds in FOSS was a disgrace. It was a disgrace the way taxpayers' money was used. We didn't hear a word. Didn't hear nothing. So that's where we went wrong. Partnership process really drove us onto the rocks, basically. And what we have now is, and what we face now, we have, like Jimmy, I'm going back to Crow Park 1 and Crow Park 2. And I was very encouraged when we had 75% of IC2 members who voted no to Crow Park 2. Us in SIP2 Grassroots, we campaigned very, very hard. We went around all the hospitals. We had people visiting council yards. We campaigned very, very hard for a no vote. And we were delighted when the 75% of people voted no to that. And like Jimmy said, then we had a chance. We know there's no magic wand. Jimmy didn't say that. He said that we could fight back. That's 75% of people. The trade union movement in total was sending a clear message to the government, we're not going to take this, we're going to fight back. And what happened? I think what happened was that David Begg again and Jack O'Connor again conspired with their pals in the Labour Party, because that's where they're closer to. They're closer to the Labour Party than they are to any of us union members. They conspired in the Labour Party to introduce the FEMPI legislation. And what the FEMPI legislation did, it held up a gun to the back of all trade union members' head. And it said to them, if you rode against Haddington Road, you're going to get worse. So it did frighten the life out of people. It did, like Jimmy said, it disheartened people. It persuaded people, if your union leaders are not ready to fight, you can't achieve this on your own. So that's what they did to us. And that's where we are. And you have to be honest with ourselves. And we look where we are now. And I'll be honest with you and I'll tell you the truth. And if you look at it through a football analogy, we might become clear to you. Being honest, in SIP2 Grassroots, we're a group of very, very committed people. But if you look at through a football terms, we're Accrington Stanley. That's who we are. That's how small we are. Right? Accrington Stanley. Jimmy will tell you that.
Even I knew who that was.
And if you look at United, and Jimmy, he's 70,000 members countrywide. He's Walsall, right? And what we're trying to fight against, you have SIP2 and Jack O'Connor, and he's Manchester United, right? And there's Accrington Stanley and there's Walsall trying to fight against Man United.
Walsall don't sound too good.
Well, I'll tell you what John Kidd is.
All right.
There's John Kidd in Efisa. He's had an argument with SIP2. He's St Patrick's Thistle in Scotland. So there we all together, and we're all trying to fight SIP2 on Old Trafford all the time. And we're fighting them on their ground, and we're going to lose. So what we have to do, we have to look at ourselves and say, how the hell can we defeat this giant? I'm doing it from the inside. I'm fighting from the inside. So is Kieran, so is Marnie. We're doing it all the time. But the system they have in place, and the supposed democratic system they have in place within SIP2, doesn't even allow me and Marnie or Kieran to vote for Jack O'Connor as leader. We're not allowed to do it. The leader of North Korea seemingly is coming over and taking advice off Jack O'Connor on how to run a dictatorship. And that's what he's taking advice off. So we're trying to fight a clean fight. And trying to fight a clean fight with these people is very hard. Now I'm going to propose two things to use to do today. And I've made mistakes along the way as well. Sometimes I'm so enthusiastic to have a go at SIP2, to have a go at IC2, that I maybe do things, I jumped to a decision. I will do a protest next week or the week after, and I did the coffin protest outside IC2's building here there a while ago, and we got maybe 50 people to turn up, and we had the coffin dictating that IC2 was dead. And as a trade union, let's be honest about it, it is dead, right? But so you say to yourself, I jumped too quick. I tried to organise, didn't give myself enough time. Now today we're in November, and as a challenge I'm going to put out to you today is that I walked on the last Trade Council's march. And the one thing that Jimmy's done and tried to do as a trade unionist, he's tried to connect with ordinary people out there, as well as trying to organise members on sites and all, as he said. I met Jimmy a while ago at the property tax march in Dame Street, where Jimmy is trying to take on issues that involve ordinary people, whether they be in trade unions or whether they're not in trade unions. And that's the way to go. You're trying to connect with your communities as well as your own members. Because that way, a union becomes relevant to workers and the ordinary people and the rest of society. But where I'm putting the challenge out here, I went on that Trade Council's march, and Kieran would know, I organised 2 different groups to come in, or 3 different groups, it would be honest. With SIP2 grassroots, Dundalk says no and Dublin says no. And there's probably about 40 of us all together at that march. I looked at the People Before Profit banner, there was about 40 people there. I looked at the Socialist Workers' Party, and they had about 30 people there. And I looked at SIP2's group. There was Paul Bell, there was Kevin Figgis, there was Chris Rowlands, all officials. I didn't even get a notice in my workplace to attend that rally because they're so afraid, because if I brought my members in to attend that rally, they wouldn't like the result. So they didn't ask anybody. I got an email actually, just to tell you, and I think I told some of you before, I got an email in the weeks leading up to that to ask me to go over to England with a SIP2 delegation to go on a protest against privatisation in the health service in England. I mean, to go over there, I have privatisation in my own hospital, in Kappa Hospital. I have more contract workers now in my location than I've ever had because of Crow Park 1, because of Haddington Road. But we're getting back to what I'm proposing to you, and we've 6 months to organise it. I'm fed up. I'm not going on any more SIP2 marches. I think we're giving them credibility that they actually don't deserve. What I'd ask you to do here, we've 6 months to do it between all the different groups that's in this room. I'm asking you to organise a May Day festival. I'll be asking John Kidd to put out of FISA, to put 50 men in uniform at the front of that march, to organise our own May Day Workers' Festival. I am not marching behind David Begg or Jack O'Connor ever again. They don't deserve my support, my members' support. Now, if using the Socialist Workers' Party can organise 30 or 40 people to a Trades Council march, we have 6 months to organise between People Before Profit, between the Socialist Workers' Party, between Unite, between FISA, between the Says No groups, which I have lots of links into, in an All-Ireland way. And we have 6 months to organise that. And we organise a festival, and we organise Christy Moore to come and sing. And if we achieve, Jimmy's talking about putting the fight back into people. Imagine to yourselves and think about it. If we get a bigger festival than them, that'd be a bigger blow to them than any other thing we can do. And if we do that, we have the alternative festival. We have the biggest numbers at our festival than they do. What will that do to them? That will undermine their position. And that is, we're taking them out of Old Trafford. We're taking them back to Ackers and Stanley. And then we're making them fight on our ground. That's one challenge. The second challenge is, Jimmy said he's disaffiliated himself from the Labour Party, and I congratulate him on it. But I would ask Jimmy to do, and I'd ask, because if Jimmy did it, I'd ask Jimmy now, and he doesn't have to answer me now, I'd love Jimmy to disassociate himself from ICTU. Because if Jimmy disassociated himself from ICTU, I guarantee you that I could bring a few thousand members into Jimmy's union, because we're not then associated with ICTU. There's two challenges for us to consider. Now we've met, there's another group I haven't mentioned, there's the teachers groups. They have grassroots members too. I've met them in this room. And I've met them in this room. And we have them down there. They're picketing today. With their leadership selling them out. I'm winding up now. With their leadership selling them out. They have the same problem. And I'd ask the teachers as well to join with us. Let's have the biggest May Day festival we can have outside of their group. And thank you.
I talked briefly about what happened in the buses in August and what happened 2 weeks ago, because I think from that we may sort of share some lessons with some ideas. A lot of it chimes with what Alan has said and also what Jimmy has said. But if you just go back a little bit to last August, there was, to me anyway, those was in the buses, a very significant strike last August, 3-day strike. There had been a proposal to cut a cost-cutting plan introduced in the bus. This is on foot of 2 years of previous cost-cutting plans. That was rejected by 95% of the workforce, not just drivers, but all grades in the bus. And the mandate was overwhelming. The unions really had no choice but to lead a strike. And something surprising happened during the 3-day strike, because in the run-up to it, there had been an attempt by the officials to spread fear, say, oh, the government will leave you out there, you don't care, there's no buses. They'll do all sorts of things to you if you go out and strike. But once the strike started, a very strange thing happened, which was the morale, the numbers on the pickets were tremendous. Furthermore, when the RTA always do this, they go to get a vox pop, ask people what do you think of this outrageous strike. What they found was that most people actually, that they had trouble finding anybody to slag off bus drivers. That's not normally a problem they have in Dublin, but they found it difficult to find people to slag off the bus drivers who were on strike. Most people, the general public, supported the strike, and the overwhelming response of quite a lot of people was at least somebody standing up. And that fed back into the strike on Monday and Tuesday. Now I know, because I speak to my officials, that they had reckoned 2 days should do it. 2 days and we should break these guys. They'll go from 95% rejection to 45. Didn't happen. Most guys after the second day of the strike, Monday was a bank holiday, most guys and women, but Tuesday, were ringing up their mortgage providers saying, I'm putting this on hold for 2 months. It may be a longer strike, maybe 3 months, but as long as it takes, we'll stay out. And the officials were banjaxed. The plans that the officials had and that the company had, and that more importantly Leo Varadkar fell. And it fell because there was a mood to do it. And once people engaged in strike action, they realised their own power and their own capacity. And that changed completely the narrative that was going to be there. And what actually happened in the long term was it took them 5 attempts on 5 separate occasions to get back to the workforce and put an almost identical deal with minor concessions. And on 5 times they went back to both the MBRU and SIP2, and each time they ratcheted up the fare. The first time that he came back after the strike, it was overwhelmingly rejected again by 70%. And that really did put fear into them. Third time he came back was rejected by 60%. The extraordinary thing, because I find this funny, on the 5th occasion they came back with the ballot, same ballot, and we were joking among ourselves about how long is this going to go on for, you know. On the 5th occasion they drafted in an IBEC-ICTU task force comprising of Danny McCoy and Dave Begg to look into the reasons as to why we had rejected the cost-cutting plan. Now, the last time, I don't know if Dave Begg has ever been on the bus, but I'm pretty sure Danny McCoy has never been on the bus in his life. But these guys were drafted in to investigate why bus drivers had rejected the cost-cutting plan. And they came up with a reason. Facebook. Facebook. there had been a group of drivers got together and set up a Facebook group. It quickly got about 400 people. And when you went onto the Facebook group, what you found was a lot of drivers were really angry about this stuff, had very articulate arguments against it, and very articulate arguments in defence of public transport. And Begg and McClure and McCoy came up with the reason that Facebook was the reason for it. So put it to another ballot. It got farcical at that stage. And obviously what was happening throughout the period of time was the numbers were going down. Because people were getting really sick of it. We're getting demoralised. It became fairly obvious that our shop stewards were not in any position, really, politically in no position to lead a strike. At no stage did anybody in the union leadership make a couple of very simple points. And if you go back over the footage during the strike, the people who were making these points were bus workers on pickle lines, not officials. That, for example, Car and the government had cut 28 million from the subsidy in the space of 3 years. 28 million. The strike was over 6 million. A proposed 6 million cut in the rates of pay for drivers. That's what they wanted to save. And we were told that they would shut down the entire transport system of Dublin over 6 million quid. Not only that, but as the thing went down, it became more ludicrous. They had private buses waiting down by the docks. They had plans to privatise the entire service. They would lock up Dublin Bus. This wasn't coming, by the way, just from the government. Noel Dowling, an ex-SIP2 official, came out with this. He went on radio and said, it's possible if they reject it again, you could end up with Dublin without Dublin Bus. This is an ex-SIP2 official drafted in the dirty work of the ICTU IBEC task force. So far so similar. Eventually they got it in. In fact, my union SIP2, the SIP2 members never accepted it. We simply voted against taking strike action after 5 ballots. But we've never formally accepted the cost-cutting plan. So the question now is, what do we do? What do we learn from this? And where do we go from here? And I can honestly say that I have never seen a level of both anger, frustration, and also quite a high level of demoralisation. Because the initial mood in August, where we had a sense of ourselves, a sense of our purpose, that we could actually win it, was really battered out of us by our trade union officials, who time and time again told us, they leave you out there, you'll never win a strike, you can't really strike at all. You would think that we were gardeners in the Botanic Gardens, and no offence to anybody in the Botanic Gardens, if there's anybody here, that we were gardeners and nobody would notice we were on strike. This is the national transport system. We had the capacity to bring the entire country to a standstill, but our union officials were busy telling us that nobody would pay attention to this at all. And over a period of time, it obviously didn't work. So the demoralisation, the anger, the frustration is all there. And one of the loudest cries I've heard since then is that people want to leave the union. Not there's a tradition of inter-union rivalry and airplanes between the MBRU and SIP2. Increasingly, I'm having arguments with people who just want to leave both unions, not pay into any union, such as the level of frustration. And you have to ask, what's the best strategy in that situation? Is that really going to get us anywhere? And I don't have any solution. I will say this though, my experience over the last number of years is that there's no shortcut. There's no easy solution. What the strike or what the Dublin Bus dispute shows me is the capacity. When we get action, when we go into action, the capacity the workers have to actually fight. We'd have no leadership whatsoever. I do feel, however, that if we simply packed in, say, SIP2 or the MBRU and try to set up something different, that we're missing the point. Why did the membership, at the end of the day, accept the deal? And I don't think it's simply because of trade union officials. I think we can obviously slag them off and say that these people are absolutely pernicious and they're absolutely outrageous and they're conniving. But why did people accept it? And I think they accepted it for political reasons. They didn't see a political alternative. They eventually were worn down by the lack of leadership, but the lack of any sort of distinct leadership, both on a rank and file basis from the shop stewards. I remember going to a Liberty Hall 2 weeks after the strike, when our official was laughed at. I mean, I don't already say this, but I actually felt sorry for the guy. This guy's earning £100,000 a year, and he tried to justify the deal to cut the wages of members who were on £35,000 a year. And he came up with a few reasons as to why they should accept it. One of them was that apparently the recession is going to be over next year, and we will get these things back in a year's time. And he has this on good authority. He was laughed at. He was humiliated. He had absolutely no standing with the members. And yet, over 3 ballots, he managed successfully to force the thing in. You have to ask yourself why. How did he get that? How was he able to do this? And I think we have to move beyond just slagging off union leaders per se and say we have a job to do on the ground among our own rank and file. We have to instill a confidence in our own rank and file so that those ballots, when they do come back, are stopped. Those ballots could have been stopped by the shop stewards. Had you had 10 shop stewards to SIP2, they could have told the official to F off, that it's an identical deal and we're not taking it. And the same I think applies to some extent if you have a majority in the ASTI and anywhere else we are. If there's a mood there to fight, then it should be organised through our shop stewards. If we don't do that, I think we're conceding too much, and I think very often we concede officials are some sort of gods who can just simply slap these things in. I don't think that's the truth. I think one of my favourite stories that I heard from a miner during the 84 strike was when he asked me, do you remember, and people here probably don't remember, but in 72 and 73, the miners overthrew Tory governments, overthrew the governments of the day. Who was the leader of the NUM? It wasn't Albert Scargill. It wasn't a left-wing firebrand. It was a right-wing guy called Joe Gormley. But the miners were still able to fight because the rank and file organisation the miners had and the belief in their own capacity was so powerful. So I think that whatever we do in the next period, and I'm open to any suggestion really, I don't think we should simply concede that officials are always going to be all powerful, always going to be able to slap us down. It's up to us. If we're organised properly in the rank and file groupings, in whatever union we're in, then we can beat them. And that's the lesson we learned from last August.
Open again today on a deal that'll get them to Swally Haddington Road, just like the other workers were treated the same way. The same story repeated with the bus workers. Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible. In fact, I remember Owen saying to me when the last ballot they took on the bus deal, they presented an option to them that he doesn't never heard of happen in this country before. Happens in England, where they said, "Are you really sure you want to go on strike? Not, are you voting for the deal again or not? But do you really, really want to go on strike?" That's more or less how the question was posed to the SIP2 members who, after the fifth time, accepted the deal. So I think the shock of the outrageous sellout of Haddington Road, followed on by the FEMP legislation, has had a ripple right throughout the trade union movement, right throughout every workplace, not just the public sector, but on into the private sector. It's kind of, what's happened here and where do we go? I think it's been an outrageous sellout on behalf of the Labour Party. And Richard Boyd Barrett tells the story. People might have heard him last night about on the night of the Haddington Road, the night before the deal was clenched. One of the the guys in the ushers told him that he saw a strange sight of Jack O'Connor walking into Brendan Howland's office at about 1 o'clock in the morning for this private, how do we get this over the line with these guys? And so the link between the Labour Party and the official trade union movement is absolutely poisonous. They have a grip on it, and I think it's a great step forward that Unite has taken this positive step and is looking at supporting alternative and new and different types of political formations and movements and parties and individuals and all the rest of it. But I do want to put the argument a little bit further in terms of Unite, because I have the good fortune of 3 or 4 times a year tutoring shop stewards courses in Unite, and more or less just facilitate shop stewards to sit down, work out problems together, get to know each other and help each other learn what it is to be a good shop steward and the nuts and bolts of the job. But inevitably and always, and in fairness to Unite, they encourage their tutors to do this. You allow some of your sessions for political discussion about what's going on in the world and the economy, political parties and all the rest of it. And this week I had about 22 of them, which is quite a lot. But I tell you, it does encourage you when you're on these courses, because you can be overwhelmed by defeat and downtrodden by the economy and the movements aren't really taken off and all the rest of it. But when you actually see new, young men and women in all sorts of industries, public and private, in all sorts of little towns and big cities, taking the very courageous step to do a thankless job that is absolutely and utterly important to gelling the trade union movement together, and they do that very often day and night with very little recognition for it. But what drives them to do that is a sense of justiceness, is a sense of equality, is a sense of we have to do better. And that is still in young workers in this country is quite inspiring. But when you get on to talk about politics with them, they're baffled by the link with the Labour Party, because they've no political background, and they just think, why do we do that? So, obviously it's great that we can now say to them we've broken that link, but then they're also baffled by something else, and that's the idea that people can't leave other unions to join Unite. They have people in FBD Insurance, in Tara Mines, in the public sector, in different scenarios in colleges and in hospitals, who want to leave SIP2 and join a better union. And the better union they're looking at is Unite, and they can't do it. So when you use the parlance of the football teams, I think Walsall should open up its club membership to the other teams to make a bigger Walsall and a better Walsall and a stronger Walsall. I really do feel that at some point the old school traditions of gentlemen's agreements between the unions that you can't this and you can't, it has to be broken. The idea that the ICTU can dominate everything, including the May Day marches and wage agreements and all, that idea has to be broken. Because all that is about is arrangements between mainly men of years and years ago to safeguard their little organisations or their big organisations or their property or their little bubbles of membership in different unions. It does not fit the bill of modern day austerity and the attacks that workers are coming under in this economy, and that are going to go on and on and on for a long time. Because despite what the government say, we're exiting the bailout, but it is not going to change. We are going to get billions more of cuts to the public sector. We're going to get more attacks on the transport workers. We're going to see nurses working longer hours. Teachers have to take more kids into the class. All of that is coming at us. And as a councillor, there's a very interesting thing that has also happened as a consequence of Haddington Road, and that is that it's almost like they've got this jigsaw that's, you know, the Troika came along, they put all these things together, made a big jigsaw of it, and the pieces are starting to come together for them. Take the property tax. You must get everybody to pay a property tax. That property tax will then fund a company called Irish Water, who will then tax your homes further. And then the following year, we'll tell the population the property tax is going to be used for libraries, schools, parks, etc. But the year after that, that property tax will fund the creation of local employment offices, which will take workers off the dole for an extra €20 a week to work in the libraries, the parks and the offices, where decent trade union, well-paid, well-trained workers could have a job for life, who are now being dispersed, gone, sacked. We're going to take them off the dole to replace those full-time jobs. And this jigsaw is coming together very nicely under their austerity plan. And these are the kind of things that real people see. People who work in the local authorities, who work in the colleges, who work in the hospitals, they see this plan coming down the tracks of them, and they see the jigsaw fitting into pieces. So the big question is what is to be done about it. And I agree with Owen. We can't keep banging on about union officials and not talk about the shop stewards movement, about recreating that movement, about politicising shop stewards, and crucially about getting them to link together and coordinate together and conspire together and work together and talk together and meet together. After all, isn't that what the bosses do? Isn't that what the bankers do? Isn't that what the capitalists do? So how do we put up any sort of defence, never mind in opposition to them, unless we're highly coordinated, organised from below? And so they are the challenges to it. And I'll just leave it at this. I want to take up the challenge from yourself about all of the small left parties unite and whoever getting together for a May Day rally. I think the theme of this weekend, and we kind of teased out at the opening rally last night, has to be about building coalitions, about building movements, about working together. And funny enough, the person who put it best last night was Michael Taft from Unite, when he talked about we might have traditional differences in the way we look at things or minor theoretical differences, but we can't afford to lash onto them as the way forward. We have to get together and work together on the things that unite us, that bring us together. And over the next period, that's absolutely crucial, and I think we have to look at that. The same theme came up again this morning when we talked about the housing crisis. Peter McVerry said the same thing. We need to create a coalition of movements, councillors, NGOs, anybody who will really shake the government to say we are on the verge of a massive housing crisis, and that's on top of a jobs crisis and everything else. But just as their jigsaw works to suit their ends, our jigsaw can work to suit ours, because in solving the housing crisis we can help to create jobs. In creating jobs we can get more trade union members. I do think some crucial changes need to be made at both the middle and the top of the trade union movement, but ultimately the shop stewards in this room, the shop stewards I met this week, are the key to changing the future of worker solidarity and how the unions move forward.